Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
it's transformative. It's bigger than anything we've ever done.
The House passes the president's Build Back Better bill, but it faces a tough fight in the Senate. 3 local Congress members join us on that and more.
Naperville's mayor calls for the end of Illinois' mask mandate amid an increase in COVID-19 cases.
If we're going to survive, we may have to do it out of the city, out of the county, out of the state.
One-on-one with Cook County Assessor Pritzker as some business owners say they're getting walloped with higher property taxes due to new assessments.
This is institutional betrayal.
Fresh off a championship game, the Chicago Red Stars see their coach depart under accusations of emotional abuse.
An investigation into possible labor and anti-discrimination law violations at Parlor Pizza.
I wanted to start Ladies of Virtue to literally stand in the gap for girls who may not have those positive role models in their life.
A local program aimed at helping black girls on the city's south and west sides go to college.
And Jeffrey Bayer on the newest skyscrapers and other projects that popped up during the pandemic in tonight's Ask Jeffrey. But first, some of today's top stories. An 8-year-old child marks the 6th person killed at a parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin. This as the man accused of fatally driving an SUV into a crowd at that holiday parade appears in court today. Prosecutors charged 39-year-old Darrell Brooks Jr. with 5 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, among other charges. They're also now considering adding a 6th homicide charge after announcing a child's death during court. More than 60 people were injured, including at least 17 other children at Sunday's parade. Wisconsin court documents show Brooks was released on a $1,000 bond earlier this month for allegedly running over a woman who claims to be the mother of his child. Bail was set today at $5 million. Governor J.B. Pritzker signs Illinois' new congressional district map into law. These new political boundaries drawn by Democrats eliminate districts where a majority of voters voted Republican. Pritzker says the maps reflect Illinois' diversity and preserved minority representation. Change Illinois is among those groups criticizing the new map. The nonprofit says, quote, "Never before have Illinoisans seen such a brazen show of how corrosive politician-led redistricting can be for voters and communities, putting partisan self-interests above the needs of people in communities across the state." No Republican input was needed for the new map because Democrats control the General Assembly and the governor's office. And coming up, we'll hear from congressional leaders on this, the president's Build Back Better Act, and more. All kinds of confusion today over the status of Bears head coach Matt Nagy. Patch.com reported that Nagy has been informed he'll be fired after the team's Thanksgiving game against the Detroit Lions. But Nagy denied the report at today's news conference, adding he's had great communication with ownership and is solely focused on Thursday's game. Nagy holds a 31-27 regular season record with the Bears since he was named head coach in 2018. The Bears enter their Thanksgiving matchup on a 5-game losing streak. And former Bear James Big Cat Williams will preview that game tomorrow night. And up next, the battle over Illinois' mask mandate, so stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
The mayor of Naperville is calling for the removal of mask mandates in Illinois amid an increase in COVID-19 cases in the state. Last week, Mayor Steve Cherico posted on Facebook saying, "Fact, Illinois is the only Midwestern state that currently requires a mask, and yet as of today, we are no better off than the surrounding states." It goes on to say, in my view, based on the CDC information and the minimal, if any, impact of COVID mitigation strategies on actual results, it's time to drop the mask mandate in Illinois. Joining us to explain his stance on the mask mandate in Illinois is Naperville Mayor Steve Cherico. And we're also joined by Dr. Mia Taormina, an infectious disease specialist with Dooley Health and Care, formerly known as DuPage Medical Group. Thanks to both of you for joining us. So, Mayor, let's start with you, please. In your social media post, you cite CDC data showing southern states in the U.S. Currently have lower transmission rates. Tell us more on why you think the mask mandate should be lifted in Illinois.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I think that what's more interesting is not the southern states, because people can argue that that's a different climate and different types of behaviors that can lead to safer environments, perhaps. But in the Midwestern states, this 9-state region, we're the only state that requires a mask. And really, we are right in the middle in terms of death rate. Naperville, Illinois has a lower transmission rate than the surrounding states, but we're all in the same grouping. And transmission rates really, surprisingly, aren't a direct link to death rate, which I think I used to believe it was. At least that's what I was told. But it doesn't play out that way.
Could that lower transmission rate not be a reflection of the existing mask mandate?
Yeah, it could be. But I think the ultimate measure is death rate. Look, people get sick, and we understand that masks can help a little bit, but at what cost? And right now, I believe that I don't think the data is supporting, and it's not a huge burden, believe me. I mean, trust me, I'm not beating up the governor on this. I think he's made his best effort to protect the public. But the other 44 states, I don't think are all wrong. I think that Illinois right now is one of the outliers, and we have watched this virus cycle through states with mask mandates and without, in a very similar fashion.
So for viewers' reference, in DuPage County, it's currently experiencing a 3.8% positivity rate. That's up nearly 0.5% in the last 7 days. Illinois' current test positivity rate is around 4.1%. Dr. Taormina, over to you. What is your response to the mayor's argument about lifting the mandate?
I agree with him on the context that we are the only Midwest state at this moment that has a mask mandate in place. I don't think that's going to be the case very long. We're looking at our neighbors in Michigan with a 17% positivity rate over the last week. Our neighbors in Minnesota with an 11% positivity rate over the last week. These are not acceptable trends. This very much is beginning a fifth surge, a fifth wave of this virus, which can get really out of hand with the upcoming holidays. I want these masks to be done and over with. And I think in some ways, in a stepwise fashion, we're going to see that in the weeks and months to come as we progress through booster doses, as we progress through vaccine mandates, as we progress through vaccinating more of our children. But at this moment in time, the trends are not favorable. With a 4.1% state positivity rate, we are approaching that 5.5% positivity rate that originally put us back into the masking in August.
And Dr. Taormina, also sticking with you, which factor should we, are public health officials and the governor considering when they look at when and whether to lift the mask mandate?
So specifically looking for getting out of this substantial to high transmission rate category. And we've been sitting there for quite a long time. We got down nice and low in September, and things were looking like they were making good strides. But here we are again with October and November bringing us indoors and bringing us closer together, and we are seeing these cases uptick again. We still only have about a 50% fully vaccinated rate in the state of Illinois. That's not going to be enough. It's not going to achieve what we need statewide in order to get us to a point where we are feeling that herd immunity that's being experienced in some other states at this point, with either higher vaccine rates or with a combination of vaccines and recovery, like what we've seen in some of the southern states, with so many people being infected with COVID that they're essentially experiencing very low transmission and positivity rates because of a feel of widespread immunity right now.
And Mayor Chirico, last year, members of Naperville's City Council were split on the issue of enforcing mask wearing and then deciding to reject it. Tell us about the approach that the city took and why.
I think there was, first of all, it was a very different world at that point. We had no vaccines. The therapeutics weren't as advanced. We did have a lot of stress in our hospital system. And so we were looking for tools. And one of those tools, obviously, was the masks. I think the reason that we split was, and it was a split, it was a 5-4 vote, I believe, was because I think a number of us, including myself, had visited other states where they weren't having as strict of mitigations, and they were having very similar results. And so, from my perspective, it just didn't make sense. And since that time, we have certainly gained a lot of tools. we have come a long way in terms of both vaccines and therapeutics. As of yesterday, actually, our local hospital had 28 ICU patients. Only one was a COVID patient. So, and we are in a period of advanced, accelerated transmissions. And so, from the beginning, we all talked about the whole purpose of trying to flatten that curve was to protect the healthcare system, which I fully support and agree with. Really, the healthcare system was stressed in the first wave, lesser so in the second wave, lesser so in the third wave. Today, for COVID at least, it's just not
COVID
it's
is
not
not
having the same reaction,
a major stressor on the healthcare system. We've got about 30 seconds left. Sorry to interrupt. I want to get back to Dr. Mia Taormina before we run out of time. What is your advice to people who are pandemic weary about mask wearing and vaccinations and boosters, as we head into the holiday season in the colder months?
Is that question?
It's all about layered mitigation.
Go ahead, Dr. Taormina.
With layered strategies, we have to include vaccination, masking, social distancing, hand washing, all of the above. And the more of these factors we have at play, the safer we're going to have experiencing over the holidays. If you haven't had your children vaccinated yet, now is the time. We are seeing these numbers tick up, and we want to keep these kids in school. We know that they're not going to have severe illness in most cases, but the prolonged syndromes that some of these kids and adults experience after getting COVID infections is just sort of altering, the sense of normalcy and staying in school and staying at work and getting back to the day-to-day. The masking will fall soon enough. We just have to hold on through these closer winter months and get these numbers back down again.
Okay. Dr. Mia Taormina and Naperville Mayor Steve Cherico, thanks to you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And now to Paris with local members of Congress. Paris.
Brandis, President Joe Biden's $1.75 trillion Build Back Better Act narrowly passes in the House. The spending bill tackles climate change, expands health care and the social safety net over the next decade. No Republicans are supporting it, calling it the Build Back Broke Act. And here's what House Speaker Nancy Pelosi had to say in response.
It reduces the deficit and grows the economy. Unlike, and perhaps I need to remind you, unlike the Republican tax scam, which was passed in the dark of night with the speed of light, with no hearings whatsoever, and it increased the deficit by more than $2 trillion.
And here to talk about that and much more are Congresswoman Robin Kelly, a Democrat from Matson, Congressman Mike Quigley, a Democrat from Chicago's North Side, and Congressman Sean Casten, a Democrat from Downers Grove. We did invite all the Republicans in Illinois' congressional delegation. None accepted our invitation tonight, but we do thank you all for joining us as always. Congressman Quigley, I want to start with the news of the day. President Biden announces the release of 50 million barrels of oil from the Strategic National Oil Reserve. What must be done to ease cost pressures on Americans as holiday season approaches?
I think part of the good news that the administration worked on there was getting China, India, and some of the other big economic powers to join in, tapping into the reserves, easing some of the economic pressure due to the energy costs there. Look, I think it makes a big difference that they're working on the ports, working on some of the labor pressure issues. Post-COVID economic growth is extraordinary, and it's going to make this all so much more difficult. But I think these are good initial moves by the president.
And amid that, Congressman Casten, President Biden is renominating Fed Chairman Jerome Powell to his position, again, amid some of these inflationary pressures. Your reaction to that?
I'm very pleased. It's my pleasure to serve on the Financial Services Committee, where Chairman Powell comes and addresses us quarterly. And he has been such a steady hand at the tiller. He is trusted by both Republicans and Democrats. And he's been telling us on committee for, really the better part of 3 years that he has so much excess ammunition thanks to the 2008 crisis and all the bonds that he's holding, but that our stimulus over the last few years has been overly focused on monetary stimulus, them buying bonds, and not sufficiently focused on fiscal stimulus. And he's been asking us to rebalance. So, we're now making the effort to rebalance, and I'm glad to see him renominated as someone who's been there, and again, most importantly, is trusted by folks on both sides of the aisle.
And a lot of key decisions still to come at the Fed. Congresswoman Kelly, let's get to that Build Back Better Act. It barely passed in the House thanks to Speaker Pelosi wrangling enough votes to get it. Do you believe that she got assurances from two holdouts in the Senate, Sinema and Manchin, to ultimately vote for it?
I do believe that there's been discussion. I'm not sure if she received assurances. I'm sure Chuck Schumer and others are working with Sinema and Manchin to talk to them or try to get them to support the bill. And hopefully they will. I don't think they want to go down as being the two people that stopped such a historic bill, a bill that has something in it for everyone.
And speaking of something in it for everyone, Congressman Quigley, it helps pre-K kids, college kids, and even the elderly. Tell us specifically what's in here for Illinoisans.
Well, look, I at least have to touch on this infrastructure bill when it comes to Illinoisans, because we got it done, and that's no longer the theoretical that Build Back is at this point in time. I mean, think about this, $4 billion for Metra and PACE and the CTA. They got a $14 billion backlog, $1.7 billion for Illinois for clean, safe drinking water, money for access to the internet for everyone in, below poverty in this state of Illinois, $1.3 billion for bridge repair, and $9 billion for highway projects. That's the reality that before we even talk about Back Better, infrastructure's going to start almost immediately, and that's the good news. And I think that for those who say, why just the physical infrastructure, Build Back Better will mean, as Congressman Kelly said, something for everyone, building our human infrastructure, just listing some that you just mentioned.
And Congressman Caston, your big focus has always been climate change. What's in this bill to address climate change, and is it enough?
Well, I think the lesson of this bill and the lesson of COP26, where I was in Glasgow, is that we have passed both internationally now and domestically the single largest climate bills ever in our history. And no, they're not enough because the scale of this problem is huge, but I think we can still take a victory lap and keep pushing for what we have. We've got significant investments in tax credits for electric vehicles. If you buy an electric vehicle, you might get as much as $12,000 in tax credits to lower that. Money to make sure that we can build charging stations for those vehicles, not just along the highways, but also, in homes and communities that don't necessarily own their home or have an attached garage. So we get this out to everybody. And, in total, that's about $550 billion over 10 years, which is huge. It's not nearly as big as the amount we continue to subsidize the fossil fuel industry. So we've still got some inefficiencies. But it's a really important down payment, and I think is forecast to reduce CO2 emissions by 30 to 40% by mid-century, which is enormous.
So a down payment, but still a long ways to go. Congresswoman Kelly, there have been legislative accomplishments here. We mentioned infrastructure, Build Back Better passes the House, and yet President Biden's approval rating is relatively low, and House Republicans, or Republicans in general, are widely favored to win back the House in 2022. Why do you think that is?
I think it's early yet, and I think when Americans start feeling the effects of the bills that we have passed, they felt the effects of the American Rescue Plan, and then as my colleague just said, the infrastructure bills, things will start almost immediately, and then we'll Build Back Better when the gas prices go down, when, inflation corrects itself and other things start happening, really kitchen table issues that people talk about. I do think things will improve. People are still suffering some, food is still high, but I think as we move along and as the supply chain, we get that straight and things are delivered, I think that things will change. I'm still an optimist when it comes to 2022 because frankly, Democrats have been delivering. We haven't just been talking about it.
Congressman Quigley, are you an optimist when it comes to the climate in Congress? You have lots of Congress people being threatened with their lives. You have several deciding they're not going to run again because they just feel it's unsafe and the tenor is so toxic. How bad is it?
I think the shortest way to say it is that we have metal detectors as you enter the House for the first time in history. I think that says a lot. And as one of those who was in the chambers on January 6th, when there was the assault on our democracy, to have some of my colleagues suggest that it never happened just weeks after it took place. And obviously, you know, the things we saw from Representative Gosar are just so reprehensible. And the fact that what made it far worse was Leader McCarthy, who should have voted to censor his own member. In any other workplace, had you posted a meme like this where you were actually killing a colleague, no one would have tolerated that. You would have been fired immediately. So I think that's just a flavor of how much more difficult it is to act appropriately in this body.
Certainly a lot of concerns of things like that leading to actual violence. Congressman Caston, speaking of elections, you're going to be challenged at a primary by current Congresswoman Marie Newman, who's going to run in the new district that's been drawn, your new district. Are you disappointed that she's going to challenge you?
Look, obviously, you never want to run against a friend. But everybody's entitled to run for Congress. There's nothing wrong with that. What I'm looking forward to in the redistricting process is you run for Congress because you care about big, important things that matter nationally, and you represent a certain finite community. And it's kind of fun, frankly, to expand the community out, to meet new people, and to consistently be reminded that what matters in this moment, and it's what Mike was just saying, we are good when we work together, when we focus on those things that unite us. It's the proudest moments in our history. We are at a moment in our history right now when an awful lot of people are looking to divide us. And I think it calls for all of us, not just elected officials, but anyone in any position of leadership, to point to that goodness and decency that's at the heart of our character and go forward. And I've enjoyed doing that for the last 2 terms and look forward to continuing to do it going forward.
And we should remind everybody that Governor Pritzker did indeed sign those new congressional maps into law just this afternoon. Congresswoman Kelly, voting rights has long been a big concern among Democrats and among their voting base. You have a handful of states here proposing or passing laws that would give legislators, partisan legislators, or other partisans the power over elections. What can be done at the congressional level to counter some of that?
Well, as you know, we have 2 pieces of legislation that we passed in the House, and they haven't passed yet in the Senate, and we have to get those bills passed. Again, we don't want our democracy taken away. We don't want the big lie to be extended or perpetuated over and over when we know that our elections are safe. And we see what's happening in some of the states like Texas and Georgia and places like that, and what they're doing with the laws, what they're doing with the redistricting. Other colleagues will be running against each other because they're taking away districts. So we have to keep fighting for those voting rights laws. We cannot give up. And again, we passed them in the House, but it's just we have to get them passed in the Senate.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. And our thanks to Robin Kelly, Mike Quigley, and Sean Caston. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And up next, a local mentoring program aimed at helping young black girls go to college. So stay with us.
Spend Saturday evening with the Voices of Chicago. Latino voices at 6 and Black voices at 6:30. See you on Saturdays. For the last 10 years, a local woman has made it her mission to help young black girls go to college. Chicago Tonight's Joanna Hernandez tells us more about her passion to uplift girls on the city's south and west sides.
I see myself in the girls that I serve.
Jamila Tramiel founded Ladies of Virtue 10 years ago, a mentoring program aimed at preparing young black girls for college. Nevea English started the program when she was a sophomore in high school.
I really just wanted to be around females that was around my age and I could actually relate to.
As part of the program, English and others participate in career workshops across the city.
It gives me time to socialize with people, learn about other careers other than the medical field, because that's really what I'm based on. So it gave me a chance to open up to different things.
A calling Tramiel says she had when she went off to pursue her degree.
When I was younger, when my parents divorced, when I had, some of the difficulties that I faced as a child, I did not have a big sister to talk to. I didn't have anybody to talk to. I felt kind of like I was dealing with it by myself. And so that's why I love mentoring.
What started with 6 participants has evolved to serving more than 2,000 girls in the last 10 years, providing mental health services, mentorship, and support for young black girls and women on Chicago's south and west sides.
Research shows that Black girls are viewed as needing less nurturing and support than their peers. And so we know that that's not the case. And so that's why we're standing in the gap and providing mentoring and leadership opportunities so that our girls feel seen, that they feel supported and comforted and nurtured every step of the way.
8th grader Erin Eberhardt has been part of Ladies of Virtue since she was 9 years old.
I love the people there, how I know that if I ever fall behind on something and if I ever, they help be on track, you have somebody else to talk to and not just talking to a family member.
Every student is partnered with a mentor to learn from and look up to.
I feel like I could do more than what I have done when I started because I'm out my shell now. Because when I first started, I was quiet. I didn't want to communicate with nobody.
And this senior has dreams of becoming a nurse and traveling the country just like her mentor.
When I graduate, I want to still be in a program and stuff and have my own mentee.
The organization serves girls ages 9 to 18 and runs its programs at schools and weekend gatherings in their communities.
I like to say you have to be the change that you want to see, and I see a lot of people, especially my peers and colleagues, we're leaving the 9-to-5 sector and we're starting our own businesses, starting our own nonprofits because we did not have these resources when we were younger. I think the biggest challenge now is to become fully funded in these organizations to make sure that we have all of the resources and opportunities that we can provide the youth that we serve.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
And 7 months ago, Ladies of Virtue moved into a space inside BBF Family Services in North Lawndale. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, commercial property owners complain of soaring property tax assessments. We talk one-on-one with Cook County assessor Pritzker. This weekend, the Chicago Red Stars played in the championship game. Today, the team is in turmoil as long-standing allegations of abuse come to light. An investigation into possible labor and anti-discrimination law violations at Parlor Pizza. We hear from one of the reporters who helped break the story. And Jeffrey Baer on the latest additions to Chicago's ever-growing skyline in tonight's Ask Jeffrey. But first, some more of today's top stories. The families of 2 Naperville natives who died at the Astroworld Music Festival are filing wrongful death lawsuits against rapper Travis Scott and event organizers. 20-year-old Jacob Juranek and 21-year-old Franco Patino died in a stampede at Scott's concert earlier this month in Houston. The Chicago law firm representing the families claims Scott and event organizers were fully aware of the chaos that unfolded and did not stop the concert until more than 40 minutes after city officials declared it a mass casualty event. Chicago police are seeking information about a pair of missing teens who were last seen outside Amundsen High School on Friday. The Chicago Police Department has issued missing persons alerts for 15-year-olds Isabella De Leon and Suheli Zapata, both of whom attended the Northside Chicago Public High School. In a letter to the school community, Amundsen principal Anna Pavicevic said, quote, "Events like these cause tremendous anxiety about the safety and security of all students. Please know that at this time, beyond being Amundsen students, there's no indication that this disappearance has any direct connection to our school or other Amundsen student. Anyone with information about the teens is asked to contact the police at 312-746-6554. And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Brandis, thank you. Property tax assessments are out today for much of Chicago's north side, and they show a 14% rise in assessments for residential properties and nearly 50% for non-residential, including commercial properties. The amount of property taxes one pays is based on the assessment, of course, so this potentially means higher property taxes for a lot of property owners all across the city. Cook County Assessor Pritzker has vowed to fix what has been a broken assessment system, but it's caused some pushback from business owners who fear it could put them out of business. And joining us now is Cook County Assessor Pritzker. Assessor Kagi, thanks for being back here. We mentioned the system under your predecessor. Multiple audits found it to be regressive, inaccurate. How have you changed that system?
Well, actually, first of all, thanks for having me, Paris. We just had a study that was published by the gold standard in our field, the International Association of Assessing Officers, and they looked at the first phase of our reassessments in the north suburbs, and for the first time, our assessments are within industry standards for equity, accuracy, and uniformity. And that's made a big difference for folks in the north suburbs where residential property taxes are up much less than they have been in the previous decade, and we're building confidence. A lot of studies have shown that our numbers are being much more accurate, and that's the whole point of assessments, that they're supposed to be an accurate snapshot, so we divide up the property tax burden amongst us all fairly.
And one of the things you've done is shifted some of the burden from residential to commercial. And let's look at some of the numbers in Chicago this year, because this is the year that the city is getting reassessed. The reassessment happens every 3 years. So for commercial, it's up 82.5% there. Does that necessarily mean that these commercial properties are going to pay that much higher in taxes?
It does not, because assessments are dividing up a pie. So the overall base is expanding in Chicago by about 44% so far. So because the pie is growing, each share, even though assessments might go up, property tax bills won't go up as much. We saw similar shifts when we reassessed the north suburbs, the one that just passed the grade for industry standards, and commercial property tax bills were up about somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 or 10%. So what people need to know is that a change in your assessment definitely doesn't involve the same change in your taxes, and it can oftentimes go in the opposite direction. There are hundreds of thousands of people whose residential assessments went up but actually paid lower property tax bills because they have a smaller share of the burden. And studies are showing that our assessments are more accurate, and so it's a fairer division of the burden.
At the same time, we have heard from some commercial property owners. One owner in Albany Park said that his assessments had tripled in this year's assessment. And let's hear from two business owners in that property, one Ultimate Ninja and Twisted Hippo Brewery in Albany Park.
If we're going to survive, we may have to do it out of the city, out of the county, out of the state. I don't know at this point. We've spent the last 2 years plus in survival mode, in pivot mode, and this is just one more potential move that we're going to have to make.
We feel like we've brought a huge value to the neighborhood, but the problem is, it's not. We wouldn't be able to stay if the prices went up that much in taxes.
Assessor Kagi, your response to some of these business owners who say their assessments in this case have tripled but have gone up so much that it puts their business in jeopardy.
Well, remember, part of in assessments is you're supposed to take an accurate snapshot of the value of buildings that are out there. And certainly I empathize with them that the impact of COVID has impacted small businesses like them, hotels and restaurants. And we take into account those effects when we do our reassessment. But we also have to remember that the last time that Chicago was reassessed under the Barrios administration, studies showed that on average, commercial properties were 50% underassessed, especially the biggest ones. And that meant that small businesses like theirs and homeowners were shouldering too much of the burden for those big corporate buildings downtown. And because, Cranes has looked at our revaluation of the buildings downtown, they've shown that our numbers are not only accurate, but even conservative. That will reduce some of the burden of higher assessments on small businesses like these. And it's just a reminder that a rise in your assessment doesn't involve the same change in taxes. And we know that small businesses up north in the north suburbs were shocked by increased commercial assessments, but when they actually got the bills, the change was not nearly as large. And the key thing is we have to remember that homeowners in neighborhoods that have experienced depopulation and disinvestment, they've had to shoulder the burden of the distortions that were there before, and righting this ship is important for fairness to everyone.
So reiterating the point that even though these folks may have seen giant leaps in their assessment, it doesn't necessarily predict a corresponding rise in their property taxes. But, a lot of business owners have told me they understand the need to right-size the system, to fix the system, but does it all have to happen at once? Can it be phased in, again, for some of these commercial owners that are seeing higher assessments?
Well, Paris, do you remember what year I was elected?
I don't remember any elections at this point, but 2018. Yeah.
It was 2018, and it's now 2021, and the reassessment only affects people's taxes in 2022. So really, this has been 4 years coming, and all of those years, we have to remember that people were shouldering the distortions in the system that existed under the assessments of the Barrios administration. So Again, studies that were done by the International Association of Assessing Officers and Cranes just did a real good look at our commercial assessments. They said that they're not only on the money, but actually could be said to be conservative. And so we're getting within industry standards for the first time. Now, we always acknowledge and we walk humbly that we can get assessments wrong, and that's why the appeals process exists, especially for smaller businesses where we have to differentiate the circumstances from the big ones.
And we do note those studies that have said that the system has produced more accuracy than in the past. You mentioned the appeals process. There are multiple ways to appeal. There are multiple infamous property tax appeals lawyers, namely Ed Burke and Mike Madigan. Does this mean they're going to get a lot of business right now trying to appeal some of these numbers?
Well, the good news is that because we're within industry standards in places like the north suburbs where we did our first reassessment, we're starting off more accurately. So homeowners and businesses don't have to pay extra fees just to correct something that should have been done right in the first place. We're starting to see results on this. Appeals are on track to be down for the third straight year at our office, and allows us to concentrate on those cases where we are off the mark. And we remind people you don't have to hire a lawyer. We put in place a system where appeals to our office on the commercial side are anonymous, and we look at the data. And this is all part about building confidence in the system overall. And being accurate at the outset is the most important thing we can do for everyone, whether you appeal or not.
Oh, and part of the issue with commercial owners is that Cook County, as I read, is the only county in the state that taxes commercial properties at 2.5 times residential. Is that something that should change?
Well, what we have to remember is that this is pretty common in the rest of the country. In the neighboring state of Indiana, it's part of their constitution. In places like Minnesota that have a thriving economy, our East and West Coast peers have differential rates. So it's not an obstacle to having a good investment environment, and it's not unusual. I do think what we need to do in this state is reduce the burden that is on all property owners in shouldering the cost of educating our children. We're dead last in the United States for school funding at the state level. Just 25% of our school district funding comes from the state. In most states like Indiana, it's closer to 50%. And if our state was chipping in, or the federal government was chipping in more for educating our children, property tax burdens would be lower for everyone. And I think that's more important than ever in this time of the digital economy growing, which kind of gets a pass from having to shoulder the education of our kids, which is what most property taxes are for.
When you say digital economy, very quickly, you mean taxing online sales and all that?
Sure. We're doing this on Zoom right now. I'm not aware that the state collects any income from Zoom.
All right.
But Zoom generates income. And things like this need to be shouldering the cost of educating our kids. And as our economy gets more digital, there are more and more things out there that are generating economic activity, and we don't want the burden to all remain on people who own property.
Sorry,
Assessor,
certainly something more to look into, but we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Paris. Thanks for everyone.
The longtime coach for Chicago's professional women's soccer club is out. That's amid allegations of systemic abuse that players say went ignored for years. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with the latest. Amanda.
Yeah, Paris, the Chicago Red Stars community should otherwise be celebrating a tough but impressive season. The team was in Louisville just this past weekend, playing in the National Women's Soccer League Championship game. The Red Stars lost the title match to the Washington Spirit under the guidance of Coach Rory Dames, who resigned Sunday, a day later. In a statement, then the team complimented Dames' leadership for its consistency and leadership on the field. For 11 years, I have dedicated myself to help build the Chicago Red Stars into one of the top international clubs. Effective today, he said in that statement, I'm refocusing my attention to my family and future endeavors. No indication then or since of issues with Dames, though the team had to know what was coming. That is this, an investigation in the Washington Post detailing how big-name former Red Stars players had, as far back as 2014, told higher-ups at the U.S. Soccer Federation Dames was verbally abusive. Molly Hensley Clancy broke that story and says U.S. soccer is the biggest force in the sport in America.
In soccer, it oversees youth soccer and also the national teams. And Kristen Press, who's one of the stars of the U.S. women's national team, she's been very vocal on equal pay issues as well. She was an employee of U.S. soccer when she played for the Red Stars and for Rory Dames. So my story says that in 2014, Kristen Press went to the leaders of U.S. Soccer, Sunil Gulati, who is the president, and U.S. Soccer is also based in Chicago. She went to Sunil Gulati. She told him that she felt that Rory Dames' coaching was inappropriate. She recalls using the word harassment, and she tells me that Gulati was very dismissive of her and her claims.
Other players backed that up, and that prompted an investigation of Dames, but it is unclear what came of it.
I know that the owner of the Red Stars, Arnon Whistler, was aware of this investigation in 2018. I know he was briefed on some of the allegations by players as part of an interview process. Two sources have told me that. What the team says is that they never got any formal recommendations or any sort of formal report from U.S. Soccer, and that does seem to be true.
Now, Dames did then keep his job, and in lieu of those formal recommendations, the Red Stars modified his coaching duties, added other coaching staff. That is not enough, however, for loyal Red Stars fans just hearing about all of this, like Angela Sullivan. She's an organizer with the team's official independent supporter group. This year has been a reckoning for the NWSL, with 5 male coaches leaving amid allegations, 1 over claims of sex abuse. And Sullivan says it is clear now that the Red Stars are part of what she calls institutional betrayal.
People and organizations that we trusted to keep the players safe and give them, a happy and healthy place to grow and really thrive it feels like a sham. Feels like it was all being done under the cover of night and behind our backs and using our goodwill to their advantage.
Now, national investigations into this culture of abuse and the league are ongoing, and the Red Stars issuing a newer statement yesterday, updating it, saying that the team had previously actually initiated, in the wake of all of this national turmoil, an independent review of player safety, and that is still ongoing. The team says it will implement any recommendations that come of that review, and that we stand with the players who are fiercely advocating for change. We are committed to doing our part to ensure a safe environment for the league's players, staff, volunteers, and fans. Now, the National Players Association, you can think of that as like the Women's Soccer Union, has also made demands of the league. Sullivan's group has demands locally for the Red Stars, like greater transparency, also a system where players can report anonymously any allegations of abuse. And if those demands are not met, she says that they're going to hit owners where it hurts, in the pocketbook, by boycotting games and also picketing at the Chicago-based league. Fans say that, yes, during games from the sidelines, you could hear Coach Dames yelling. But that's not what this is about. Male players are yelled at by their coaches, too, after all.
What their coaches don't do is seek to control them the way that Rory did, to control their movements, to keep them from seeing their families. And they also don't, Rory really initiated these relationships with players where he was texting them at all hours. He was, having these 22-year-old girls go to lunch and dinner with him and telling him, if you don't come to dinner with me the night before the game, we're going to lose. So there was this element of kind of manipulation that was going on.
You can be a tough coach and you don't have to be an abusive coach.
Now, no return from my call to Coach Dames. By the way, he is still a coach. He's owner of the Eclipse Select Soccer Club, and that is a formidable Chicago area club in youth soccer. And Hensley Clancy, that Washington Post reporter, says that is what she's looking into next. Paris, back to you.
All right, so still more to go on this story. Amanda, thanks very much. And up next, a look into investigations at Parlor Pizza. But first, we take a look at the weather.
Former employees of Parlor Pizza say they were forced to work overtime without pay, under toxic working conditions, and that people of color were seated in the back of the restaurant in the so-called rejection section. The restaurant, with 3 Chicago locations, is now under city investigation after Block Club Chicago reported on the allegations from former workers. Joining us to talk more about this is Block Club Chicago reporter Quinn Myers. who's been following this story since he first helped break news about the allegations. We did reach out to Parlor Pizza for a response, which we will hear in just a bit. Quinn Myers, good to see you. Welcome back. So 2 agencies are looking into these allegations. Which ones, and what can you tell us about their investigation so far?
Sure. So they just, launched this investigation. The Business Affairs and Consumer Protection Agency at the City of Chicago and the Chicago Commission on Human Relations. The BACP is looking into allegations that unpaid labor was performed at Parlor at the behest of management. And the Commission on Human Relations is looking into what you refer to as the rejection section, the alleged rejection section that allegedly customers of color were sat in specific locations at Parlor's restaurants, specifically at the River North location. So those 2 agencies are they're encouraging people to reach out, former Parlor and current Parlor employees, as well as customers who believes that they possibly were discriminated against at these restaurants. And that's kind of all we know about the investigation so far.
And Quinn, of course, you write about harassment, and we just mentioned, overtime without pay. Describe some of these allegations from the former employees for us.
Sure. So we spoke to several former Parlor employees who talk about the rejection section, what they call the rejection section. Allegedly, this was a specific location in the River North restaurant where people of color were often sat, a less visible location. We also heard about sexual harassment. We heard about a kind of alleged culture of retaliation, where if specifically female servers didn't look a certain way or weren't up to standards, they could not be scheduled the next week, or could be scheduled, but only in certain sections of the restaurant that weren't as profitable. We also heard about allegations that after servers worked a full shift, they would have to clock out and then roll silverware unpaid. We heard from several former employees that they say they often had to work many doubles in a row. Several people said as many as 11 doubles in a row. And again, as I should mention, Parlor has denied all of these allegations and said that they are not true.
Okay, now speaking of Parlor, we were able to speak with their new Chief Diversity Officer, former WVON morning radio host Maze Jackson. Here's what he had to say.
We strongly push back against our company being a racist company. But what I will tell you is that we do recognize that sometimes things happen. And so what we want to do is do a self-examination. We want to check, make sure that our policies, processes, and procedures are in place to ensure that nothing like this, if it ever was to happen, doesn't happen again.
And Quinn, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but you also spoke to a manager. What was her response?
Sure. We spoke to Tanya Yalda. She is the general manager at Wicker Park, and she basically said what Maze is saying there, that there's no truth to these allegations, and that she, as a woman of color, would not have tolerated that. And she also said there was one other allegation I didn't mention where former servers said that management often kept COVID cases hush-hush, quote, hush-hush, that if someone tested positive for COVID on staff, that they would have to find out from their fellow staff members, that they didn't hear from management. Parlor had pushed back on that, and Tanya Yalda, the manager, said that that also wasn't true, that they notified staff members if they had indeed been exposed to COVID.
And of course, it remains to be seen what comes of the investigations that these city agencies are conducting right now. Quinn Myers at Block Club Chicago, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Brandis.
Up next, details of new downtown architecture in an encore edition of Ask Jeffrey. Stay with us.
Ask Jeffrey on WTTW is made possible in part by Binny's Beverage Depot. Since 1948, Binny's has remained local, family-owned, and dedicated to helping you celebrate the best times in your life.
Binny's Beverage Depot toasts Chicago's proud history and its people. Since 1948, Binny's has remained local, family-owned, and dedicated to helping you celebrate the best times of your life.
You may have been stuck at home for the past 15 months, but the city's ever-growing skyline didn't skip a beat. New buildings have sprouted up all over downtown Chicago, including some projects that might surprise you. Jeffrey Baer joins us now for a tour of what we might have missed in tonight's Ask Jeffrey. Jeffrey, good to see you again. I don't know when the last time you went to the Loop was, but I don't know how many of these buildings were a surprise for you as well.
Totally a surprise in some cases, absolutely.
So this question comes from Evanston. It says, I just started going into the Loop again and was amazed at all the new buildings. Can you do an overview of some recent projects that were finished during the pandemic?
Well, I certainly can. And, it feels a little bit like many of us during the pandemic were sort of in suspended animation. So these buildings seem to have gone up in a blink of an eye. Let's start out with one that's very hard to miss. It's the St. Regis Chicago, formerly known as Vista Tower, by acclaimed Chicago architect Jeannie Gang. You probably know Jeannie Gang for the St. Regis's neighbor tower called Aqua, with its undulating balconies. The soaring St. Regis, with its zigzag profile inspired by a natural crystalline form called a frustrum, is the third tallest building in Chicago, and it's also the world's tallest building designed by a woman. One curious detail you'll notice is the 83rd floor. It's completely empty and open to the elements. That's because it's known as a blow-through floor, and it was added to the building's design to reduce sway in the structure after wind tunnel tests on a model of the building.
So another huge development is down the river at Wolf Point. What's the latest on that project?
Right. So Wolf Point is the confluence of the three branches of the Chicago River, north, south, and in the main branch. Today, it's just west of the Merchandise Mart. Over the past decade, it's been totally transformed from a surface parking lot by three sleek towers, two of which are new since the pandemic. The 60-story Wolf Point East was completed last year, and it's home to almost 700 residential units and a soaring office building at the center of the complex, which is set to be completed in early 2023, is known as Salesforce Tower, after the tech company that will be the main tenant. Both of these new towers are designed by Clark Pelly of New Haven, which also did the site plan. Another super tall project, you can see it from the expressway. It's nearing completion. It's called One Chicago, and it's right across the street from Holy Name Cathedral on the near north side, so way on the other side from the expressway, but it's so tall. The residential complex includes two towers, 49 and 76 stories respectively, designed in partnership by Getch Partners and Hartshorne and Plunkard Architects. And they're connected at the base by retail and office space, with tenants expected to move in later this year. Getch Partners also designed a high-profile new tower on the Chicago River's South Branch. 110 North Wacker is partly supported by gigantic metal trees or tridents to open up the base for a river walk. Getch has done dramatic things like this at the bases of several of his recent buildings. For example, right across the river at 150 North Riverside, which opened a few years ago, that building sort of seems to come to a point at the bottom. And then there's also another building from a few years ago, 111 South Wacker by Getch, where the ceiling of the lobby is the underside of the spiral ramp to the parking garage.
Always impressed with architecture in Chicago. But of course, not every new addition downtown is actually a new building.
Oh, right. Yes. There's one that you won't see from Lakeshore Drive, the extensively renovated base of the Sears, Willis Tower. Over the past few years, the building's lobby and ground levels have undergone a complete overhaul by architecture firm Gensler, featuring a soaring atrium and new entranceways, plus shops, restaurants, and an outdoor green space. It's all designed to connect the building more with the street instead of it being a fortress as it once was. And as part of that whole project, there's a really eye-catching new piece of public art along Jackson Street by Icelandic and Danish artist Olafur Eliasson. It's inspired by waves on Lake Michigan. And then the $800 million transformation of the old post office, the old Chicago post office, into 2.5 million square feet of office space is finished. And it includes a 3.5-acre rooftop park, complete with a running track. Now, that park is only open to the building's tenants, but it can be rented for special events, Brandis, so keep that in mind. These are just really a few of the transformations that you'll notice when you return to the Loop this summer for work or for pleasure. And by the way, if you cast your gaze in the other direction, that is out to sea, you'll see the new Sable Hotel at the east end of Navy Pier, which I would argue has really improved the look of the pier when you view it from the south. It's being marketed as the first hotel ever being built on top of Lake Michigan. Oh, and one final note before we go. We recently did a story on the search for a Chicago anthem back in the 1980s. And after the story aired, the winner of the contest, Jeff Jacobs, contacted us and gave us a recording of his anthem. And contrary to what I reported, Jacobs also told us that he did, in fact, received the prize money after a year of, quote, wrangling with the city. You can listen to his song on our website, and it is well worth it.
Tough to get money out of the city, isn't it? But that's great that, that he reached out to us and that he actually did get the prize money from the city. All right, Jeffrey Bear, thanks so much as always.
My pleasure.
And you can visit our website for more details about new buildings downtown. And while you're there, don't forget to submit your own question to Jeffrey Bear. That's at WTTW.com/AskJeffrey. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. A push for booster shots as COVID-19 cases rise ahead of the holiday season.
And arts correspondent Angel Ito takes us on a trip to a tuition-free art school just south of the city. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.